Have you ever stopped to think that maybe these tools, the ones meant to make us, well, smarter or just faster, might actually be doing something else?
Something like subtly changing how we think.
Exactly. Reshaping, maybe even sort of dialing back our core cognitive skills.
Yeah.
That's really the big question behind this pretty fascinating new study we're diving into today. It's from MIT's Media Lab.
Right.
And they've been looking at how large language models, LLMs, like ChatGPT, how
Mm.
they might be impacting our critical thinking. So our mission today really is to unpack the details of this research. We want to explore what they found, which is frankly quite surprising,
Mhm.
understand why it matters, for you listening, for all of us really, and talk about what experts are already seeing out there.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, all this info, it's coming straight from a recent article detailing the work by Natalia Kosmina and her team at MIT.
And it's such an important discussion to be having right now. I mean, our reliance on these LLMs, it's just skyrocketing, isn't it?
It really is everywhere.
We talk a lot about the productivity boosts, the immediate gains, which are real.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely vital we start understanding the bigger picture, the sort of longer-term effects, especially on our thinking, our cognitive abilities.
All right.
So this deep dive, it's not just about what the study found, but digging into why those findings could be so significant for how we deal with all this new tech.
Okay, so how did they actually go about measuring this impact on the brain?
Well, the setup was pretty clever.
Tell us about it. The MIT study, how is it structured?
Okay, so they had 54 subjects. These were adults aged 18 to 39 from the Boston area.
Right.
And they split them into 3 groups. Group 1 used ChatGPT. Group 2 used good old Google search.
Okay.
And the third group, they called them the brain-only group. They used, nothing but their own minds.
Interesting. And what did they have them do?
The task was pretty specific. They had to write several SAT-style essays, 20 minutes each.
Oh, okay. Like standardized test essays?
Exactly. On topics like the ethics of philanthropy or maybe the downsides of having too many choices, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So how do you measure brain engagement during that?
That's where the tech comes in. They used EEG.
EEG.
Yeah, electroencephalogram. It measures electrical activity in the brain. Those caps with all the electrodes.
Right, I've seen that.
So they recorded brain activity across 32 different spots on the scalp. And they were looking specifically at different brainwave frequencies, or bands like alpha, theta, and delta.
And what did those tell you? Alpha, theta, delta?
Well, think of them as signals of different brain states. Very broadly, alpha can be linked to relaxation, but also ideation. Theta often relates to memory processes and focus, and delta can be involved in deeper semantic processing. They give you a window into how the brain is working, basically.
Okay, so they've got the setup, the groups, the task, the measurement. Here's where it gets really interesting, right? What did they find, especially with the ChatGPT group?
Yeah, this is the core of it. The findings for the ChatGPT group were, concerning.
How so?
They consistently showed the lowest level of brain engagement compared to the other 2 groups.
No less, wow.
Yeah, significantly lower. And it wasn't just neural signals. They underperformed linguistically and behaviorally, too.
What does that mean, linguistically and behaviorally?
Well, their essays, for instance, they were described as being extremely similar to each other, lacking original ideas, often using the exact same phrases or concepts. It got to the point where 2 English teachers who reviewed the essays called them, and this is a direct quote, largely soulless.
Soulless. Oof, that's harsh.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it, of something missing. That personal spark, the unique perspective.
And the EEG data backed this up.
It did. It showed low executive control. That's your brain CEO. Basically planning, focusing attention, managing complex thoughts.
Okay.
And also low attentional engagement. They just weren't as mentally in it.
And did it change over time?
That's another key finding. Over the course of writing several essays, the researchers noticed a trend. The ChatGPT users seemed to get, lazier.
Lazier.
By the third essay, many were essentially just feeding the prompt to ChatGPT. The paper describes it like, just give me the essay, refine the sentence, edit it, and I'm done.
Oh, wow. Just copy pasting, basically.
Pretty much. Minimal effort, minimal engagement.
Okay, so that's the ChatGPT group. What about the others? The brain-only folks and the Google search users.
Now that contrast is really telling. The brain-only group.
Yeah.
They show the highest neural connectivity.
Highest. So the opposite.
Exactly. Different parts of their brains were communicating much more effectively, building those internal pathways for learning, for memory.
Right.
And this was especially strong in those alpha, theta, and delta bands we talked about, the ones linked to creativity, memory load, deep processing.
So they were really working their brains.
They were deeply engaged, curious, and importantly, they also reported higher satisfaction with their work and a stronger sense of ownership over their essays.
That makes sense. And the Google group.
The Google Search Group also did well. High satisfaction, active brain function. It wasn't quite as high connectivity-wise as the brain-only group, perhaps, but still very active.
So using Google didn't seem to have that same dulling effect.
It suggests a key difference, right? Searching for information, synthesizing it yourself, even with Google's help, seems to engage the brain very differently than having an AI generate the whole text for you. It's active searching versus passive receiving.
That distinction feels really important. Okay, so those initial findings are pretty stark, but the researchers didn't stop there, did they? There was a second phase.
Correct. They wanted to know if this effect, this lower engagement, was reversible,
Right.
or could people learn to use AI better, perhaps?
Right. Can you bounce back? Or maybe use it differently?
Exactly. So after the first round, they had everyone rewrite one of their essays. But here's the clever part, the twist.
Uh-huh.
The original ChatGPT group, they had to rewrite it without ChatGPT this time.
Ah, okay. Cold turkey.
Yep. And the brain-only group, they could now use ChatGPT for the first time if they wanted to.
Oh, interesting. So they flipped the script. What happened then?
The results were, again, really striking, and they add a lot of nuance.
Let's hear it.
The original ChatGPT group, writing on their own now, they remembered very little about the essays they'd supposedly written with AI help.
Really? They couldn't recall their own work?
Largely, no. And their brainwaves confirmed it, weaker alpha and theta activity. It strongly suggested that using ChatGPT initially had bypassed those crucial deep memory encoding processes.
Wow.
The paper puts it very bluntly. The task was executed, efficient and convenient, but you basically didn't integrate any of it into your memory networks.
So the work got done, but the learning just didn't happen.
Precisely. But now contrast that with the other group, the brain-only folks who now had access to ChatGPT.
Yeah, what about them?
They actually performed quite well. And interestingly, using ChatGPT increased their brain connectivity across all the EEG frequency.
Increased, so it helped them.
It suggests that because they had already done the hard cognitive work themselves in the first round, built those neural connections, engaged their memory, they could then use ChatGPT more effectively.
How so? Like, not as a crutch.
Exactly. More like a tool for refinement, or maybe exploring adjacent ideas, augmenting their own thinking rather than replacing it.
Okay, that's actually a bit hopeful, isn't it?
It is. It offers this glimmer of hope that AI, if it's used in the right way, maybe after you've done the initial legwork yourself, could potentially enhance learning, not just shut it down.
So it really matters how and when you use it. The sequence is key.
It seems critical. Building that cognitive foundation first seems essential before layering on the AI assistance.
Okay, the data is pretty clear then, quite stark actually. But what does this all mean for us, like right now, outside the lab? There seems to be a real sense of urgency around these findings.
There really is. And you're right, the paper is technically pre-review, and the sample size, 54 people, isn't huge.
Right, limitations exist.
Definitely. But the lead author, Natalia Kuzmina, she felt it was absolutely critical to get these findings out there now because the implications are just too significant to wait.
What are her main concerns? What's she worried about?
She's quite direct about her fears. She talks about the potential for a GPT kindergarten.
GPT kindergarten. Wow.
Yeah. And she fears an absolutely bad and detrimental impact, especially on developing brains. Kids and young adults, she says, are at the highest risk.
Because their brains are still forming those foundational pathways.
Exactly. So she's really pushing for education on how to use these tools properly, promoting what she calls analog brain development, first, learning the old-fashioned way.
Mm-hmm.
And she stresses the need for active legislation and really testing these tools before we just roll them out everywhere, especially in schools.
That makes sense. And I heard something interesting about the paper itself. Some kind of trap.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. She actually embedded AI traps within the research paper. Things like instructions telling an LLM reading the paper to only read this table below, knowing that a human reader would ignore that instruction, but an automated summarizer might follow it literally.
Huh. That's clever. A way to detect if people are just summarizing her work using AI without reading it.
Precisely. A little meta commentary right there in the research.
Okay, so that's the researcher's perspective. Are others seeing this too? Like clinicians?
Yes. You mentioned Dr. Zishan Khan earlier. He's a psychiatrist working with kids and adolescents.
Right. What's he observing? And, hearing about that laziness finding, I have to admit, I can totally see myself falling into that. It's just so easy, isn't it?
It's incredibly tempting, that path of least resistance.
Mm.
Dr. Khan is definitely seeing the effects.
What does he say?
He notes this over-reliance on these LLMs can have unintended psychological and cognitive consequences, especially, again, for young people whose brains are still developing.
Right. Makes sense.
He worries it could weaken the very neural connections that help you in accessing information, the memory of facts, and the ability to be resilient.
Resilient. How does resilience fit in?
Maybe the idea that struggling through a problem yourself, finding information, organizing thoughts that builds mental toughness, resilience. If AI does all the heavy lifting, maybe you don't develop that muscle.
That's a really interesting point. Less struggle, maybe less resilience. Okay, so this MIT study is a big piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only one looking at this, right?
No, although the field is still pretty new, scientifically speaking. We're just starting to get rigorous studies.
What else is out there?
Well, there was a Harvard study back in May, found something related. Generative AI made people more productive, sure, but it also seemed to make them less motivated.
Less motivated, huh? So you do more, but care less.
Kind of captures it, yeah. That potential trade-off between efficiency and intrinsic drive. It's subtle but important.
And didn't MIT itself have some conflicting findings earlier?
Well, MIT distanced itself from a different paper, one by a doctoral student, that had suggested AI could substantially boost worker productivity. It just shows there are different angles, ongoing debate, even within the same institution.
Right. And what about the makers of these tools? Like OpenAI. Have they commented?
OpenAI didn't respond to requests for comment on this particular MIT study. They did collaborate with Wharton Online last year to release some guidance for educators on using generative AI. So they're engaging, but maybe selectively.
Interesting. And Cosmina, the lead author from MIT, she's continuing this work.
Oh, yes. She mentioned they're already working on another paper, this time looking at brain activity during software engineering and programming tasks with and without AI help.
Ah, coding. That's a huge area where AI is being pushed.
Exactly. And she said the initial results are, in her words, even worse.
Even worse. Wow. What does that imply for, say, tech companies?
Well, think about companies hoping AI can replace entry-level coders. Cosmina suggests that while you might see short-term efficiency gains, that heavy reliance could seriously erode critical thinking, creativity, and deep problem-solving skills in the human workforce that remains.
So the people left might become less capable over time.
That's the concern.
Huh.
You optimize for immediate output, but potentially atrophy the core skills needed for future innovation and complex problem solving. It's a really big question for industry.
It really is a lot to think about, isn't it? The sheer power versus these subtle but potentially massive costs.
Absolutely.
So if we had to boil it down, the core takeaway from this deep dive, it seems to be that while AI gives us this incredible convenience, this productivity boost, there's a real potential trade-off.
A crucial one.
Especially for younger people, for developing minds, but really for anyone concerned about long-term cognitive integration, right? Keeping our thinking sharp.
Yeah.
It feels like the big revelation isn't just AI can make you lazy. We probably suspected that. It's how we engage with it that seems to directly shape our cognitive future.
That's perfectly put.
The power of just the human brain working, for real ideas, for memory, for creativity. AI delegation just doesn't seem to replicate that internal process.
Not at all. And the key insight really isn't AI yields bad for brain. It's much more nuanced. It's that AI used as a replacement, as a crutch, seems to actively bypass deep learning.
Right.
Whereas AI, used thoughtfully, perhaps as a catalyst after initial effort, might actually amplify our abilities. That hope is still there.
So the proper use is key.
Exactly. But that demands conscious effort, understanding the tool's limits, especially around memory and deep processing. This research feels like a really important call for thinking about how we integrate these incredibly powerful tools, critically assessing them, not just adopting them wholesale.
So thinking about that balance, convenience now versus maybe long-term sharpness, it leaves us with a question, doesn't it, for everyone listening? Given what we've discussed, how might you strike that balance between the immediate ease AI offers and nurturing your own critical thinking, your own memory? What does using AI properly actually look like for you day to day in your work, in your learning?
It's something we probably all need to actively consider.
Definitely something to mull over as we all navigate this rapidly changing world.